Published in August 2016, Broken Legions by Mark Latham is a semi-historical warband skirmish game, set during the Roman Empire's zenith and concerned with a secret war between the forces of order and chaos. Today's video battle report will describe a raid by barbarians led by druids against an isolated Roman villa. The Roman warband is led by a centurion and has strict orders to defend the villa approaches. It includes both auxiliaries, some armed with spears and some with bows, as well as legionaries and a faithful warhound companion. They'll be starting deployed on the east side of the table, around the villa. Broken Legions uses a D10 activation system with alternate moves, like go, you go, and then a melee round, resolving all of the melee throughout the turn, followed by a resolution round. The rules themselves are relatively straightforward, although like all Osprey Blue books they could do with perhaps a little bit more clarity of publishing and perhaps some proofreading as well. There are errata available online, and Mark Latham does have his own blog where he details and discusses the rules in more detail. Turn 1 begins with the archers deployed in the tower picking off barbarians emerging from the tree line. In turn 1, the Roman player seized the initiative, and it seems that he was hesitant to let go of it, as 5 out of the 8 turns would see the Roman player holding the initiative. As mentioned, Broken Legion's activation system means that each model makes 2 moves, or 2 actions, either a move, or sprint, climb, an attempt to invoke the gods or perform some kind of miracle, or just simply shoot their bows if they have missile weapons. Then, the play passes to the non-activated player, who moves 1 model. This is a relatively fluid way of doing things, and a lot more engaging for players than a traditional I move everything, then you move everything system, and perhaps has some of the hallmarks of the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game, which Mark also contributed to, as well as the Legends of the Old West and Legends of the High Seas systems, which he also authored whilst working for Warhammer Historical. Despite holding the initiative in turn 2, the Roman player is content to allow his legionaries to remain in the courtyard awaiting the barbarian onslaught. The Druidess advances for her first move, and for her second action successfully performs a miracle, summoning wild beasts and creatures of the forest to join the barbarian warband. Despite being in an isolated position and potentially cut off and surrounded, the Roman archers are undaunted, firing arrow after arrow into the tree line and dropping barbarians with every single hit. Sensing the danger posed by barbarians clambering up the tower and bashing against its door, the 2 auxiliary spearmen are sent down to the floor of the tower, ready to resist and defend their archer companions above. In Broken Legions, whenever a model takes an action, such as shooting a bow or engaging in melee, they roll a Fate of the Gods dice, as well as the additional d10. With a roll of a 1, this can result in something like a bowstring snapping or running out of arrows, impeding the next action. In melee, this is counted as a fumble. When composing the barbarian warband, I didn't choose to include armour or shields. In hindsight, this was perhaps a mistake, as Roman archery proved absolutely devastating. By turn 3, 3 warriors had now been killed by archery, as it was now imperative to kill the archers in the tower, which were less of a nuisance and more of a threat. 2 warriors were sent up the stairs into the tower. At the basement of the tower they met 2 Roman auxiliaries waiting for them. In a tense melee, despite bursting in with fury and much fierceness, the barbarian that led the charge was killed. The barbarian warriors floundering failed to make any progress. The barbarians brought forward their naked fanatic, a line breaker. Dodging through a hail of arrows aimed towards them, he rushed towards the base of the tower, hoping to be able to carve through the auxiliary below. A lone Roman Sagittarius archer stands on the edge of the courtyard, with a well and a chest full of amphora to his rear. He's quite isolated and cut off from the legionaries that are standing in line around the fountain. Although he's already picked off a couple of the running barbarians, 1 warrior attempts to charge. Rolling a natural 10, he moves his full movement allowance, plus 5 inches, which is enough to get him into base-to-base contact. The Roman player, in his move, alternating activation, activates first the Warhound, which is stood next to the Barbarian now and charges in, and then second brings up a Legionary to support his comrade, moving through between the gap between the cart and the fountain.
Melee resolution in Broken Legions is a callback to the Lord of the Rings strategy battle games rule set, and thereby shows Mark Latham's Games Workshop origins. The player with initiative decides the order in which combat is resolved.
Before combat for turn 3 could be resolved, all models had to have been moved. The final models to be moved, once all the Romans had allocated they were going to stand still, was the Druidess and her 2 wolves. She'd conjured these by using one of the miracles available to the Barbarians faction, drawn these from the wild woods which she was currently based in. These moved forward past the Triumphal Arch and onto the road, alongside the other Barbarian models.
As both the Warhound and the Warrior have charged into the combat, the melee resolution is thus determined by the agility score of the combatants. First the Warhound, then the Warrior, then the Archer. All 3 figures roll their combat dice, and it's a pretty poor showing for the Barbarian. Furthermore, by rolling a 1 on the Fate dice, this counts as a fumble for the Warrior. In Broken Legions, if a figure loses melee combat, they then take a presence test. Failing this, the Barbarian then breaks and runs, fleeing away from the combat. Turn 4 is a savage turn, typified by wolves and dogs chasing down fleeing men. The Roman Warhound tears into the running man, who lost the combat, whilst the wolves summoned by the Druidess throw themselves at the Legionaries. With 3 warriors and a line breaker allocated to the subjugation of the tower, the remaining Barbarians race past it and start to move towards the courtyard of the villa. Pulling back into the top floor of the tower, the archers continue to rain down a murderous fire onto the Barbarians below, killing 2 more. Barbarian casualties continue to mount, as the archers in turn 5 and 6 claim another 2 warriors. However, the Druid, until now relatively silent, starts to move forward, casting from his hands small white objects and throwing them onto the ground before him. Earlier presence tests rolled by the Druid had been unsuccessful, but finally he rolls a high enough number, and his miracle is successfully cast. Unfortunately, a second roll is required to determine the number of skeletons which burst forth from the ground. In this instance, only 3 of the 6 potential creatures are summoned. The Roman centurion and his legionaries look on in horror as the game transitions from a historical skirmish to a fantasy game. The Druid prepares for the next turn, where he will throw more Hydra teeth and bring to life more skeletal warriors. As the melee resolution phase begins, at first it appears things are going the way of the Barbarians, with a Roman warrior failing his presence test and running back to the courtyard. In turn 7, the Romans seize back the initiative. Having already thrown their pilum in previous turns, the legionaries now turn about, march forward, and form a shield wall, locking their strong tower shields together to form a barrier. Throughout turn 7, the nuances of Broken Legion's alternate activation system begin to tell. Whilst the skeletons must move individually one by one to attack the shield wall, the Roman Warhound bursts around the rest of the group and assaults the Druid. Now there's a dilemma: does the remaining warrior support the Druid, or join in the attack on the shield wall? It appears that animals rather than men will resolve this game, as the Barbarians throw their remaining wolves across the barrier formed by the cart and start attacking the archer. Whilst drawing legionaries away from their comrades to support the archer, and a failed agility roll strands one of the wolves on the other side of the well. At this point, it looks like this turn will be decisive. The skeletons now move up, once all remaining Roman figures have activated, meaning that all remaining barbarian models can now be moved.
The first melee to be resolved sees a warrior in combat but fail to wound a legionary, who, failing his presence test, flees back towards a centurion. Meanwhile, man and beast are locked in combat. 3 skeletons batter against the shield wall, and the warhound unsuccessfully attacks the barbarian druid. The druid is supported by a warrior, but unable to slay the faithful Roman hound. Meanwhile, the skeletons fail to break through the shield wall, one of their number being reduced once more to lifeless bones. The next turn, the centurion himself launches himself against the wolf within the courtyard. As dice are rolled, the wolf almost miraculously survives the onslaught, but fails its presence test, running away. The Romans' scooting shields and lower armour prove their worth, and a second skeleton falls, whilst the need to protect the druid sees the barbarian chieftain joining the attack on the warhound. The threat from the wolves gone, the legionaries can now turn to eliminating the pesky druid. The barbarian's chieftain successfully drives the warhound off, and with 2 skeletons killed, the druid now prepares more hydra teeth. Whilst in the tower, the surviving barbarians prepare for a final assault on the archers on the tower's ramparts. With die rolling 5 fast, the legionaries advance, ready to unleash a barrage of Pila. The first legionary moves forward his full allowance and prepares to throw. The Roman pilum is a devastating weapon, highly effective against armoured or unarmoured troops, and particularly effective against those with a shield. Fortunately, the barbarian druid misses the first hit. A second pillar is thrown. At this point, this could well be the deciding factor in this game. The dice are now rolled. With a roll of an 8 on the roll to hit and a 10 on the fate dice, this is a confirmed wound. There is nothing that can be done about this. Druid is slain, unable to cast another miracle. Sensing a very real danger, the barbarian chieftain, the druidess has moved up. Meanwhile, back at the tower, one of the archers has been slain, and one auxiliary remains holding off the barbarian warriors. An archer moves forward ready to take on the linebreaker, a serious threat to the tower's occupants. The dice are rolled, and the atmosphere is tense. So far, these archers have whittled down the barbarians. However, despite rolling high on the fate dice, this time the linebreaker is lucky. The barbarian luck does not continue, as the druidess fails to cast one of her miracles, Nature's Fury, and therefore unable to call out roots and vines to smother the warhound. The Roman's shield line holds. The skeleton is unable to defeat the bonus of armour, and despite winning the combat, and the Roman legionary failing his presence test, it results in nothing more than a retreat. The Roman legionaries are now able to surround and cut down the last surviving barbarian of any note, the chieftain. He's a 2-wound model, and it takes 2 losses in combat to inflict the 2 wounds necessary to kill him. Unfortunately though, with his death, the Roman player has succeeded in holding the villa, and the game is effectively over. The surviving barbarian models are assumed to flee from what has been an undisputed Roman victory. As ever, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Goodbye.